All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Exago support lab, and welcome back for those of you who have made it to one prior. I'm always happy to see some returning names on my list. So just so I know that I'm coming through loud and clear right off the bat, if everyone could type a Y or a yes in the question pane, that would be great. Okay, looks great. So you saw our first technical lab last month, and we've actually already received inquiries from multiple clients regarding the server events that Evan discussed on that lab. And along this thought process, we felt that this was a valuable resource to continue to provide to you all. If people are making use of the topics that we cover in the technical labs, why not continue to offer them? So given this feedback, we're adding a second installment of Exago Support Labs monthly. This is going to bring our grand total to 2 per month. I'm going to be presenting to you one lab right at the beginning of the month that's geared towards the simpler side of things, with my colleague Nick Cortina here to answer questions as I go. Nick is going to be the one presenting the technical labs going forward, so you'll hear from him in about 2 weeks for that technical lab. We also are going to be relating the labs presented in the beginning of the month to the technical lab. So in this case, we'll be explaining chart types to you and showing you some advanced attributes that you can apply yourself. Nick on the technical lab will be going a little bit more in depth into using an action event to modify his chart. So it was something that went one step further than the items that we're going to cover today, and we will bring you that in just 2 weeks. As always, we strongly encourage questions throughout. We love to hear from you and definitely want to make this as interactive as we can. All right, so as usual, this lab topic is based on a real ticket that was submitted by one of our clients. And we selected this particular ticket based on client topic suggestions for the labs as well. So this ticket obviously relates to charts, the combination charts to be more specific. We received quite a few inquiries regarding chart types in general and also using the newly introduced multi-axis and combination charts. These are new to version 2016.3, and we're really excited to bring you a lab that kind of fleshes out when to use them, how to use them, etc. All right. So of course, per usual, we have amended the data to Northwind so that it makes sense in this context, but the methods that we'll show you here are of course the same ones that we suggested to the client in the ticket. So today we're going to be exploring multi-axis charts and combination charts, and we'll go over multi-series charts briefly initially, just to give you a basis of understanding that is required to continue on to the multi-axis and combination charts. We're also going to be showing you how to utilize advanced attributes to modify your chart's output further. So let's take a step back and real quick, I'm just going to summarize charts so that we have an idea of we're all on the same base level of knowledge. We know where we're starting. So we know that charts illustrate our data to us so that we can spot patterns and trends. It is important to remember that a chart is really just a collection of points on a grid. So each point has an X value and a Y value, which amounts to a point XY. Keeping this in mind, I'd like to begin with a quick overview of the multi-series charts. So all three of these chart types, multi-series, multi-axis, and combination, are multi-series. So this is really an umbrella that kind of covers all of them, and then we'll whittle down to more specific types. So multi-series means that each Y value is going to be graphed in relation to the employee, which is our X value. So I'm going to navigate into Exago, and this is our multi-series chart. So the multi-series chart here, if I execute it, you can see that for each employee, we have a series here. It's going to be number of orders and then revenue here. So multi-series charts specifically can be created using bar, column, and scatter chart types, as well as line, spline, area, and bubble. Here, we're using a column chart to illustrate a classic example of a multi-series. This is usually our go-to. And we are using two unrelated series. They are multi-series charts are used to show multiple series that can be graphed against the same y-axis. So if the if the revenue here was not, and this one is actually kind of a borderline example, but say the revenue was between $0 and $500. There is no way we would be able to evaluate these values on a chart with values from 0 to 1,900,000. It just wouldn't be readable. In this situation, we have this scale for our number of orders, and our revenue really ranges from 0 to 380,000, which leaves us in a bit of a guessing game trying to figure out these values. We can hover over and certainly see the value displayed. We also have them displayed up here in our report footer, so there's certainly ways to get around this. But you can see that graphing both of these series against a scale that only pertains to the larger range of the two series can be potentially problematic. So to combat this, actually, before I move on to multi-axis charts, I want to show you what multi-series charts look like in the wizard very quickly. For consistency, we're going to go through each chart type in the wizard so that you're very comfortable when it comes to creating this yourself. In this case, we've selected a column chart type. Our data tab is going to be set up very similar to what we're used to seeing. X-axis label is, of course, the employee full name, and then our series values are just going to be the number of orders here, represented by this formula, and then the total revenue, again, a very simple formula to just sum all of the revenue. We named our series accordingly, and that's really it. Everything in the Appearance tab is pretty much standard, what we're used to. We picked a color, a theme, titled our chart. We can title our axes if we'd like. And then we can finish our chart. All right, so now we're going to consider a multi-axis chart and how they differ and what they have in common with this multi-series chart. Multi-axis charts are new to version 2016.3 and can only, as of yet, be created using the chart type line. So if I go ahead and run our multi-axis chart, all right, so you can see the exact same data graphed. On the left here, we have number of orders represented by this blue line. And on the right here, we have our revenue in green, also represented by a line. And you can see now that rather than having to guesstimate these values in this very small range from 0 to 800,000, we're given a whole new scale to read these values against. So now if we look at Margaret Peacock, we can see very clearly that she's just above $240,000 in revenue. When we were looking at our multi-series chart, it's rather difficult. She's somewhere between 0 and 380,000, but it's very tricky to decide exactly what that value might be or what it might be close to. All right. Okay, so I do want to clarify really quick before we move along that this is not to say that multi-axis charts will always be a better fit for your charting needs. We certainly are not trying to show you in these labs what is always the best option. There's always a better fit for a different situation. So what we hope to tell you is when these particular chart types will fit your data or will be best utilized to show your intended output, and then give you the tools to apply it as you continue reporting on your own. If these, for example, if these were related data fields, so let's pretend that we're graphing revenue for each employee, but we want to look at years 2014 and 2015. So our series are going to be 2014 and 2015. So for Steve Buchanan, one of these lines would represent 2014, the other would represent his sales for 2015. If that were the case, we want to see them graphed against the same axis because we want to be able to compare these. These fields are related, these values are comparative, so we want to be able to see exactly how far apart they are, how much have you increased on a visual level. We don't want to have to go and compare to the axes. So in a situation like that, a multi-series chart is certainly going to accomplish all of your needs. It's going to be the best case scenario. In something like this, with unrelated fields, a multi-axis chart might be more fitting for your data so that for the readability purposes. All right. So again, we'll check out what this looks like in the chart wizard. So let's go ahead into our multi-axis report. And we'll start with type. So here I selected line. As I said, I know I wanted more than one axis, and this is what is available to me to create this type of chart. I'm going to navigate to data, and again, this is the same setup. So my x-axis labels are going to be the employee name. And again, I just have a simple sum formula to calculate the total number of orders, and then a simple sum formula to calculate the total revenue generated by each employee. In my appearance tab, I have the same thing, colors, I can give my chart a title, etc. What I do want to look at here is these chart axes. So this button becomes very important when we're looking at a multi-axis chart. Here we can title our x-axis. So again, we're just going to give it the title of employee. It really just represents our employee names. And then we can assign our y-axis. So we can title the first y-axis, which will reside on the left. Then we can title the right one. We have formatting options available for each of these axes. So for the first one, this is just number of orders. We don't need a currency symbol. We don't need it displayed as a monetary value. But for the second one, we do want to see the currency symbol appended so that we are aware, and it is very obvious that these are monetary values. Finally, you're going to want to assign your y-axis. So here, the series name that we're using was defined earlier in our data tab. Number of orders we want graphed against our first y-axis and revenue against the second. So I'll press OK and finish, and you can see we've already looked at this output, of course, but you can see again how everything we just implemented is executed beautifully on this chart. Okay. So we're going to move on to a combination chart. It doesn't look like we have any questions coming in yet. I think these charts are pretty straightforward. The combination chart is the one where it can really get fun and you can do some funky things. So we're going to spend a little extra time in dealing with this chart, I think. So in a combination chart, we can also graph multiple series on separate axes. So far we're at the same level as the multi-axis chart. We can graph more than one series against separate axes. The difference being is that here we can use different series types rather than only having two line charts. So here we have column charts representing the number of order, and then a line chart representing the revenue generated. And this can really help us to increase readability because the lines don't overlap like they did here. You're not trying to discern two lines that may be similarly colored. In terms of your data, you're really looking at a very clear distinction between lines and columns. All right, and again, since we can plot against separate axes here, this allows for the same easy estimation of point values, and it means that we can plot data with varying ranges of values on the same chart, since each has its own set of y values to correspond to. All right, so what does a combination chart look like in the wizard? What are we looking at here? So we're going to go ahead, and our type, we're actually going to select combination chart. Under the data tab, again, our x-axis label is going to be employee's full name. Our series values are going to be defined exactly the same as they were. We have the ag sum of our IDs and then the ag sum of the revenue, so we'll get the total number of orders and the total number of revenue here. Our series names are the same. The difference here is that we have this render type option. So combination charts can be rendered in columns, stacked columns, lines, or area. Here, of course, we've chosen column and line. And that certainly, for our purposes, leads to the most readability for clarity purposes. But in your case, one of the other types might lend itself, and in that case, you can play around with them and figure out which one really works best for you. Our color is the same, employee sales, chart title, etc., etc. This is all the same. And again, we can modify our chart axes. We're going to format the first one and the second one, and again, we have this option to make these appear as monetary values. These we do not, etc. And then we assign our y-axis. So the number of orders is going to be our first y-axis, and we want our revenue on the second. You'll notice in advanced features here, I have a couple of advanced attributes applied. I'm going to remove them, and I will add them back in just a moment to show you exactly what they did, but you'll notice that we now have the values displayed for our second y-axis. You may or may not have noticed that when I first ran this report, we only had the values displayed for our left and primary y-axis. On the right, it just said revenue, and it was blank numbers. However, it was graphed identically. This green line was graphed against this set of values as if they were over here, and we did have our second y-axis. So this is going to segue perfectly right into the second half of the lab today. So the lab today focuses, of course, on the chart types, and we want you to really understand exactly what each chart type can do for you and how you can use multi-axis or a combination chart to display more data and be able to show it in a way that it might be more visible for your readers. You really want to make this as clear as possible. Advanced attributes are something that can be used to further modify your chart's appearance. So this is generally a cosmetic change, but they can be fairly significant, and I'll show you exactly how in just a moment. Initially, I want to touch on the fact that some of them are built into Exago. So in the Appearance tab of your chart wizard, you can see other features here. And then this has a drop-down, so we can affect any of these simply by clicking on them. I'm going to do font color. I can click Add Attribute, and then you'll see the appropriate filler here. So if I was to select title alignment, I wouldn't be given a hex values. I would be given alignment options. So I can align it to the left, and maybe I want my font color to be red. If I finish that, you'll see my font color is changed everywhere, and my title is now aligned to the left. So these are simple enough. They can do some really cool things. Certainly can make your chart look completely different, but there are some things that people have asked for, and of course this is based on a real ticket, so we were asked for this one directly, and they're not as intuitive. They're not something that people use all the time or something that you're going to want to amend on all of your charts, but once in a while you'll find a use case for one of these attributes, so we thought it was important to bring them to you all today. In order to access these advanced attributes in the charts article on our support site, if you scroll down to the section labeled Advanced Features, right here, we actually link you directly to the Fusion Charts Attributes documentation. So you are able to go in the Fusion documentation the way it's set up. In one section, you can click a chart type, scroll down, expand a category. When you enter the category that will hold the attributes, you'll be able to see exactly which ones can be applied to your chart type and what they will do. So we encourage you to certainly check out that documentation to see what fun changes you can make to your charts. There's really some very cool cosmetic things you can do here. So first I'm going to begin with the one that the client actually prompted me to dig into Fusion Charts and find. This particular client had created a combination chart, certainly. We know that since we just learned about combination charts, this means we're plotting two different sets of Y values called series related to one X value, and we're plotting them against two separate Y axes. So this leads to us having two different Y axes displayed on our chart. We have one on the left and one on the right. Each have labels and values pertaining to their respective series. He was hoping in this case to modify his chart to only show axis labels on the primary axis. He still wanted them charted against their respective axes, but he only wanted the primary axes to show up on the chart. So I'm going to illustrate very quickly in our output. We wanted to see all of these values here. We want to see the text revenue displayed here, but we don't want any of these values to display. Additionally, we still want this green line graphed against this set of values. So as if this line from here to here was still 240,000 to 300,000, we still want Margaret Peacock's dot to show up here. We don't want it graphed against this set of values where it would show up down here. All right. So intuitively, if you go into the chart wizard, you can enter your chart axis modification. This is where we started. And maybe you just assign them both to y-axis 1. It'll eliminate the second y-axis, it'll graph your data the same, etc. The issue with this is that it graphed everything against the left, the primary axis. Once we assigned them both to the left axis, they were both graphed against those data values, as makes sense. So then we kept looking. So now we went to advanced attributes and we found that there are actually two different advanced attributes that we can use to accomplish this. So the first one is called show secondary limits. And this is going to be a Boolean, so it's going to take 0 or 1 as its inputs, 0 evaluating to false and 1 evaluating to true. The default for this is true. I'm going to enter a 0 so that we don't see those limits anymore. And if I finish, you'll actually note that in my executed output, I don't have my 0 value here or my upper limit here, which I believe was 300,000 previously. So we've eliminated 2 of these values, but we still have 4 more that we have to work on. So then we went back in and we looked at some other advanced attributes, and there was one that was called show div line secondary value. Added this attribute. It is also a Boolean, and we evaluated it to 0 as well. You can see right in the designer our values have already been removed, and if I execute this report, we can see the line graphed exactly as it was. So if I go over here, the line is identical, but we've removed these values, which he did not want to see on his chart. As a quick note, this same client asked for an additional chart modification that is not actually accessible via advanced attributes. We looked and looked and none of them do exactly what he wanted. It was definitely an out-of-the-box request. So we were able to write an action event to accomplish exactly what he was looking for here. Actually worked closely with my colleague Nick Cortina, who is here answering your questions today behind the scenes, and will be presenting the technical lab in 2 weeks on this action event. So if you're interested in more information on charts, certainly tune back in and he'll be showing you some little bit more advanced stuff, but very useful when it comes to charting, certainly. So I did get a couple other examples of advanced attributes together to illustrate some of the other cool things that we can modify using these advanced attributes. I just want to really give you guys an idea of the type of things that are possible here. So I'm going to clean up a little bit here and then open up my multi-series again. So I'm going to work in this multi-series chart to show you the rest of the advanced attributes that we've been looking at. They're really best shown on the most simple chart. So first, I'd like to illustrate one that we have had quite a few requests for. Here we will display a number that is 1,000,000 or 1,000 with an appended M or K to the number after truncating and rounding it. So rather than seeing 4,000,000 representing 4,000,000, we will see 4M. So I'm going to go ahead into my chart and I'm going to add the advanced attribute format number scale. So I'm going to stop for 1 second to make a very important comment right now. Advanced attributes must be typed exactly as you see them on the Fusion documentation page. So this includes capitalization, spaces, etc. Everything must be identical. Copy and paste is really your friend. In these situations, typing them is only asking for error, but if you like to live on the edge, go for it. And this again is going to take a 0 or 1. So right now our number scale is not formatted, so the default is 0. We're going to type a 1 as we want to see it formatted. I'm going to finish. And when I run my report, you see here that we have 380,000, 1.14 million, etc. Instead of seeing the huge long numbers that you might read incorrectly and miss a 0, you can see them displayed much more succinctly. So the last 2 advanced attributes that I want to show you are purely cosmetic. The first is going to give us some alternating shading behind our chart. And we again simply have to copy and paste the advanced attribute from the Fusion charts documentation into the wizard. So in this case, the tag is called show alternate H grid color. We're going to add it and set it to 1. And you can see again right in the designer we have our alternating shading already appearing. So in between these blocks, similar to when we apply alternate row shading to a details section of our report, it just really makes the background makes everything stand out against the background, makes readability a little bit easier, and you can see when I execute, it looks very nice. If you don't care for this, it really doesn't matter. These attributes are not to say that they're all better if you use them all. We just want to show you some of the things that you can do. We want to show you how extensive your options are so that when you go into this, you're armed with all of the tools possible. The final one is just going to round the edges of our column. So if you don't care for the flat appearance here, we have a 3D option built into Exago, but what we can also do is use round edges. So if we add this attribute and again set it to 1, we can see that our chart now appears much more 3D almost and interactive. So, all right. So to recap, today we covered multi-series charts, multi-axis charts, and combination charts. We looked at some advanced attributes, and we should have learned what each type of chart is, how they relate to each other or how they're different, and which situations call for which chart. So if my data is set up as X, Y is how I should create my chart for ease of readability, etc. There's certainly many things to be considered, but we hope to have given you some tools to set you on your way. Additionally, we showed you how to use advanced attributes to modify your chart, and we illustrated a few of them here. We took one directly from a ticket to show you guys, which is really the whole point of the lab, and we really hope to see you at the one in 2 weeks for more information on charting and modifying your charts, as well as action events in general. I got a couple questions that I wanted to address. The first was simply, can you add more than 2 axes to your chart? Currently in Exago, we limit you to 2. If you are reporting on more than 2 series, it's likely that it would show up best on more than one chart. If you are looking to map more than 2 metrics on the same chart, it can get a little bit busy. So for that reason, we limit you to just 2 axes. But certainly you are not limited to the number of charts that you can create, of course. And then finally, there is not an error message displayed with that. We got a follow-up question. If someone attempts to add 3 axes, there is no error message. It's simply that after you've added your second axis, the button will gray out and you won't have the option to add another one. This is just to prevent people from trying to do, of course, what we're telling you is not possible. So that seems to sum up the questions. I think Nick answered most of them pretty on the fly, and not too many were applicable to everyone. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it as always, and thank you so much for your interactivity and your suggestions beforehand. I always appreciate the feedback, of course, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.